Who is in this picture? If you were an average Roman citizen in the early 1st century, you might guess Hermes. This Greek god would escort the dying into the afterlife. He was frequently depicted with lambs and rams because he was viewed as the patron god of flocks and shepherds. However, this is not Hermes, it's Jesus. Why does Jesus look exactly like Hermes, though? So as Christianity spread across the Roman Empire, the Romans decided that rather than abandon the features of their gods and goddesses, they would instead attribute them to Jesus. Thus, Hermes wasn't the shepherd god anymore, Jesus was. In fact, he was the only god, and the Romans were quick to depict and describe Jesus in terms they used for their old gods. This process of absorbing features of one culture or belief system into another is called assimilation. And it will be a central theme of this series, which is based on Dr. Mark Smith's The Early History of God. Why does this matter? First, it's important to recognize how the shift from Israelite monolatry, meaning belief in one powerful god among many other gods, to monotheism, or the belief in the existence of just one god, was a very gradual process. It took hundreds of years, and given the immense stretch of time that the Old Testament covers, it becomes easy to lose sight of that fact. Second, given how long it took for Israel to embrace monotheism, we see how rather than abandon features of their old gods, the Israelites merely assimilated the qualities into one God, Yahweh. Finally, I think it's appropriate for us Catholics to interpret these findings in light of the Second Vatican Council. By this, I mean that the Council made significant headways in acknowledging the contributions that other religions have made to human history. Particularly, these studies reveal that ancient Canaanite theology, which is rejected and antagonized throughout the Old Testament, was actually instrumental towards forming Israel's understanding of God. And you know what that means? God was at work before Israel even existed, a fact that is affirmed by the Bible. But I believe it goes often overlooked by Christians today. By the way, I should mention that this series will cover some fairly dense historical studies, many of which might have implications that trouble Catholics with a more literal interpretation of Scripture. So if you fall into this category, I want to assure you that these books are being taught in Catholic institutions, and I mean good Catholic institutions. Furthermore, the author, Dr. Mark Smith, is Catholic himself, and this series has been reviewed by Professor Bradley Gregory at the Catholic University of America. Speaking of which, what exactly happened to trigger studies like these? In the 19th and 20th centuries, there was a renaissance in translations of ancient texts from Israel's neighbors and ancestors. Before this time, a lot of these texts had gone largely unnoticed. Their translations ushered in new paradigms of Old Testament study. All of a sudden, scholars realized that the foreign Canaanite pagans, as portrayed in Scripture, weren't so different from the Israelites, at least in the beginning. Archeological, anthropological, and linguistic studies confirmed this. During the Iron Age, which is roughly 1200 to 1000 BC, or the period of Judges roughly in the Bible, Canaanite and Israelite pottery, architecture, and burial sites were quite similar. Linguistically, they were rather difficult languages to distinguish. But architectural and linguistic similarities don't mean they shared religious features, right? Correct. But when you look at the similarities between their cultic practices, such as sacrifices, you see how they shared a common religious heritage. I'm not going to go into the specific Hebrew words here, but Smith describes how both cultures, Canaanite and Israelite, had terms for slaughtered offering, annual slaughtered offering, offering of well-being and greeting, offering of vows, tribute offering, offering consumed by fire, holocaust, divine forgiveness, and more. Now to us, that might not sound too significant, but these words were very precise in the rituals they described. For Catholics, it would be like discovering a religion that also had rituals like baptism, confirmation, healing of the sick, and reconciliation, except they just used different words to describe them. We would probably accuse them of copying us. So is Israelite culture just a reskinning of Canaanite culture? No. These studies just show that they had similar elements. By the time the Old Testament was completed, Israelite rituals looked very different from those of their ancient Canaanite ancestors. Speaking of which, there are indeed some features of early Israelite religion that cannot be traced back to Canaan, at least so far. First, the older texts in the Bible describe a sanctuary in the south, a mountain that is sometimes referred to as Sinai, but also identified as Paran, Edom, Timon, and other terms in different parts of the Old Testament. The other unique feature in early Israelite culture was a belief in an exodus from Egypt. There's nothing in Canaanite culture that would suggest they shared that story. When did Israel become distinct from Canaan? Well, we don't have many archaeological materials to work with from that long ago, but there's a fairly significant inscription that dates roughly back to 1200 BC. It's an Egyptian monument that brags about the destruction of several nations, which included Canaan and Israel. Notice Canaan and Israel, as in these two places were politically distinct at this point. Thus, while we can't say much about the time before this monument, we can at least confirm that Israel was distinct from Canaan around 1200 BC. That said, their cultures certainly seemed intertwined still. The general consensus today among scholars is that Iron Age 1, again the period of Judges, Israelites coexisted with Canaanites in the Palestinian highlands. What gods did people in the region worship during the time? Finally, we can dig into the meat and potatoes of this series. The main Canaanite gods included El, Baal, Asherah, Anat, and a sun god. El was the patriarch of this group. Asherah was his consort. Baal was a younger storm god. Anat was Baal's sister and a marital deity. And the sun god, well, was a sun god. As we'll cover throughout the series, the Israelites assumed many of the qualities of these deities into their own god, Yahweh, and the worship of some of these other deities would persist throughout the nation's monarchical period. This fact would trouble Israel's prophets, who would argue increasingly persistently against the worship of other gods, until by the end of the Babylonian exile in 539 BC, Israel recognized the existence of only one God. As we'll learn throughout the course of this series, these realizations came over the course of centuries of theological reflection. And next week we will focus on the relationship between Yahweh and the head of the Canaanite pantheon, the namesake of Israel, El. Until next time, have a great day. God bless you.